everyone, I'm Emily Longeretta.
And I'm Michael Schneider, and welcome to Variety's Awards Circuit, where this time out we're analyzing and dissecting the hottest winter TV awards races. On this episode, we're looking at the drama frontrunners heading into the Golden Globes, SAG Awards, and other kudos. And Emily, why don't we start with an old favorite?
Yes, absolutely. We have to talk about The Crown.
For years, I've called for a monarchy that reflects the world outside.
I don't think it's my behavior that's threatening its survival.
This has been out of the race for a little bit, and this is the return of it with an all-new cast. I would be very surprised if they didn't get recognized in the ensemble category, because we have Dominic West, Imelda Staunton, Jonathan Pryce, Elizabeth Debicki, we can't forget about. I think this is a show that we really need to watch, and it's a huge awards favorite.
Imelda Staunton especially, playing Queen Elizabeth II, and clearly this year with the death of the actual Queen Elizabeth, a lot more attention placed on how this show was going to resonate with audiences and fans of the royal family.
Yeah, I think we might have seen a little spike of people watching it afterward too, just because you are watching a ton of the news and then you're heading over to Netflix to kind of get the fictionalized version of it. So I'm very excited to see it back in the awards race.
Yeah, and this is also the 90s version of the royal family when things started to get a little dark. So it is a very different temperament and tone to this season as well, which could actually hurt its chances, I suppose. There isn't quite as much excitement as there was during the previous version of The Crown, where it was much more about the courting of Di and Charles, and there was a lot more interest in that. So I'll be curious to see if that actually takes away from some of the interest in its awards potential this year.
Yeah, I will say that the performances of Dominic West and Elizabeth Debicki, in particular, of Charles and Diana in this part of their life are amazing. So I would be really, really surprised if they weren't in there.
Well, let's move on to something else that's dark, but on purpose. Severance, which was the critical darling of 2022, and for good reason.
Hello, my name is Mark S.
Outstanding performances by Adam Scott, Britt Lower, Patricia Arquette, and some surprising moments between John Turturro and Christopher Walken. Tremel Tillman, of course, was the standout. This was a cast that, really knocked it out of the park, but also a show that was so unexpected.
Yeah, I think because it was so different from anything else we'd seen, and it kind of came out of nowhere. We hadn't seen really any of the cast do this kind of work before, and of course, Ben Stiller behind the camera, which I think could really help in the writing, directing categories as well. So I think Severance, a lot of people were hoping it did better at the Emmys than it did, so I think maybe now it's time to shine.
Now, again, something else that's a little hard sometimes to watch, especially as the parent of teens.
But I can't imagine as a parent how it would be to watch. Euphoria is, of course, what we were talking about.
Please, God, don't ever let Jules find out what I'm about to do.
We have Zendaya, we have Sydney Sweeney, Ahmad Apatow, Angus Cloud. I mean, the list goes on and on of this ensemble. And of course, Zendaya got some love early on, but it's kind of not in the awards chatter as much as it was in the beginning. I think that this last season, though, really was strong enough to put not only her, but a lot of the other cast on the map.
Zendaya, obviously, who's won the Emmy, who definitely has been the award standout for Euphoria. But I think people started talking about Euphoria much more as not only an ensemble, but as an awards potential as a show.
Yeah, like you said, it can be a little anxiety-inducing, I would say, but I think people are still talking about it no matter how long ago it aired.
And that's the interesting thing about the calendar for the Winter Awards, because it differs from the Emmys. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not. A good example of that is Better Call Saul.
Well, you know what they say. The wicked flee when no man pursueth.
A show that went off the air this past year, but because of the unusual nature of how they scheduled it, it's still going to be eligible for next year's Emmys. But this is the final round for the Winter Awards season, so this is the last chance for Saul to get any sort of attention in the Globes and in the SAG Awards. And this is a cast that deserves every accolade imaginable, given the critical acclaim that Bob Odenkirk, Ray Seahorn, of course Giancarlo Esposito, Jonathan Banks, etc. has received. The show itself hasn't gotten a lot of attention when it comes to some of the big awards. So this is the last chance, and I'm hoping that Globes voters, SAG voters, and then again Emmy voters next year still pay attention.
I think that'll be a big standout for SAG voters, because I think actors and the people we talk to a lot, so many people love Better Call Saul. We are talking about it all the time, especially with this last season. So I'm really hoping that at least at SAG it can get some recognition.
Yeah, and at least nominations. I mean, Ray Seahorn finally got an Emmy nomination, which was a start. Now the next goal is Bob Odenkirk needs an Emmy.
Crazy to me that Bob hasn't gotten the Emmy. But what also blows my mind is that Yellowstone still has not really broken in. It's gotten the one SAG nomination last year, not get anything at the Emmys. I've always been surprised by this.
I, John Dutton, do solemnly swear.
Yellowstone's a show that I think now has sort of hit critical mass in terms of not only viewership, which it's been a major hit for a while, but now it's really gotten the attention on the coast as well.
Obviously, a lot of people know it's Kevin Costner, but the rest of this cast, Luke Grimes, Cole Hauser, Kelly Riley. I mean, Kelly Riley, if she doesn't get nominated, I will be very surprised. A completely different standout performance this year. I think it really also shows the power that sometimes cable is overlooked because of streaming, and people aren't watching Paramount Network, and they are now for Yellowstone. So I think the power of that will hopefully speak for itself.
Yeah, and also just the power of Taylor Sheridan, the fact that he's producing so many shows and there's so many opportunities for him to be recognized, not only by Yellowstone, but also by 1883
Absolutely.
And by Tulsa King. And
so many out there now.
A lot of his shows out there. So, he's definitely a name that is going to be in the conversation, even if it's going to take a while for voters to finally really recognize that body of work. Another genre, we were talking a little bit about that genre, but another genre that's been real hit or miss in the award space is the fantasy. You have two shows, of course, in House of the Dragon and also Lord of the Rings of Power, that could go either way with voters. Clearly, as we saw toward the end of the run of Game of Thrones, that it really became an awards juggernaut.
Yeah.
Now it'll be interesting to see, does that translate to House of the Dragon and whether or not we'll see some sort of attention on it?
When I think that if it doesn't get it acting-wise and in the main categories, I think behind the scenes, stunt-wise, there's a big chance that both of these shows are going to have a giant presence. And like you said, toward the end of Game of Thrones, I think it was 8 out of 9 years in a row at SAG at one point. So we'll see if that power stands with the spin-offs of these, especially with such big franchises and such a big audience. The viewership of these shows is so big, but like we said about the Taylor Sheridan world, it doesn't necessarily result in the awards.
Yeah, at the very least, House of the Dragon does have a fairly substantial number of stars that we're familiar with, like Matt Smith and Patty Considine, Emma Darcy, Olivia Cook. So there's still potential there, both in the acting and then also on the shows as well. So I'll be very curious to see, do both make it? Does one of them make it? And what about some of the other fantasy horror shows out there, like, My Beloved Stranger Things? That's still in the mix as well. Yeah. So there are a lot of shows in that space that are all chomping at the bit for attention, and how much will voters stand for that genre?
Yeah, when people are talking a ton about things, that's obviously the start of it, how they get this attention. And of course, one show that we have to talk about when you talk about a water cooler show is The White Lotus.
Whenever I stay at a White Lotus, I always have a memorable time, always.
Before it was entered as a limited series, now it's going to be a drama. An incredible cast. Of course, Jennifer Coolidge is back, but you have Megan Fahey, you have Aubrey Plaza, Theo James. The list goes on and on because that entire cast is so good.
F. Murray Abraham, Michael Imperioli. And the thing that's interesting is we're going to be talking about White Lotus again when we're talking about limited series as well. And this is the confusion. What is a show these days? Where should it be placed? Well, it depends on the guild sometimes. It depends on the award show, on whether or not this White Lotus is a sequel or if it's its own body. Is it an anthology? Is it a drama? Well, SAG says it's a drama. Emmys, on the other hand, says it's an anthology, and so do the Globes. So nonetheless, I don't know if that will actually hurt its chances on both sides because people feel like, okay, it's one thing or the other. But at least from an individual perspective, you've got these huge stars who probably will be recognized again this year.
Yeah, I think it may be a little, if it does hurt one, it could hurt Jennifer Coolidge because she did win already for this role. So it's the same role that she's playing, of course, in another chapter of it. So in that way, it is kind of another season of her exact role. So should it be looked at as a season 2 or should it be looked at as a separate show? That's kind of up to the voters.
Well, we're talking about the front runners here, but why don't we turn our attention to dark horse favorites now? Shows that aren't necessarily top of mind when we're talking about contenders, but why not?
Yes, absolutely.
And you've heard me talk about Apple TV Plus's For All Mankind.
Some say private citizens have no business in space exploration. I emphatically disagree.
This is a show that I think the critics are really behind. I don't know how many other people out there are watching necessarily, but nonetheless, if you haven't been watching For All Mankind, the storytelling of the alternate history of what happened really in society if the space race continued, if the Soviets had actually managed to land on the moon first, and that caused a ripple effect that changed the course of human history, to see how the world might have transformed in terms of social change, in terms of women's rights and gay rights, and a lot of things that go beyond just talking about space and science. That's a show that I think as a whole, people should be paying more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've been a champion for that for a while, I definitely would agree with that. I would say one of mine is, and I don't know if it's really a dark horse because it's been a little bit in the conversation, is Yellow Jackets.
I'll never forget the day I heard their plane had gone missing.
This ensemble and this group of women, and a few men, but mostly women in this show, are so strong. Christina Ricci, of course, Juliette Lewis, Melanie Lynskey, and the story is such a strong story, and it has so many different layers, a supernatural type, a horror type, but also a drama, and sometimes a teen drama, and sometimes there's murder, and it's just such a mix of things that I really hope that it gets the attention that it deserves. But I mean, the cast, there's so many great people in that show.
Yeah, absolutely. In the meantime, that's it for Drama Series. Join us again next time for another edition of Awards Circuit.
Thanks for watching.